Okay, so now we need to make the remainder of the objects on the building. To start with, let's create the foot. And the foot of this building, if we go ahead and take a look at our reference, right, it's a little bit stubby, and you can see there's these cutouts in here, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it has kind of a sloped edge, but it's like kind of a large fat cylinder with a sloped edge. And so to make that, let's go ahead and create a cylinder. We are going to, for the time being, leave the radius, let's set the radius to 60, which means it'll be 120 in diameter. It should be a little bit bigger around than the base of the tower. And then let's just make our height 10. Right? And there we go. Like that might be a little bit too big. If we look at that picture again, yeah, it looks like it's a little bit too big, but it pretty much fits. Now, the only issue right now is that, right, it's halfway through the ground plane, right? So let's go ahead and make the height 5, right? Because we're going to be moving it up 5 here in just a second. And then the Y position, let's go ahead and go to our coordinates tab. And in the Y position, we're going to say 5. And by the way, that's what the P means, is position. The S means size or scale. And the R means rotation, right? So we've moved this up 5. And then if I zoom in a bit and I rotate my view a touch so we can actually see it, it's still a little bit too big in diameter. So I'm going to go back to my object tab in here. I'm going to change the radius to 55, which makes it seem a little bit more natural. And you'll notice that, right, we have a pretty low number of subdivisions on the surface of this object, but they match here. And so we should probably, since we've done 36 rotation segments for basically everything else, let's do 36 rotation segments for this. And then let's go ahead and click on our tower base object and make those rotation segments 36 as well. All right, so this just evens everything out. 36 seems to be about the point where things get significantly smoother, but you don't take too big of a hit in terms of performance and trying to render it like on your screen while you're working. Okay, so now the other thing that we can do, that we want to do, is we haven't really dealt with caps before. So I'm going to select our cylinder again. And actually what I'm going to do with this cylinder in our object manager is I'm going to drag this down by the tower base, not as a child of the tower base, but just to the tower base. And instead of calling this a cylinder, I'm just going to call it tower foot. Tower base, tower foot. Okay. And if I have the tower foot selected, I click on the caps tab. There's this option here to fillet the edge. And I want you to notice that in our reference, if I come down here a little bit, right, there is a filleted edge. And the filleted edge is basically, instead of a hard corner, it's sloped. And so we're going to go ahead and check mark fillet. And when we do that, you'll see it totally rounds it. We just want our fillet to be one segment, which you'll notice cleans it up a little bit, but it's, you know, really making a big difference in this. And maybe we actually want our height to be a little bit taller anyway. But we also want our radius for our fillet to maybe be 1 centimeter, right? So we're getting 1 centimeter. We have this edge filleted. And then let's go ahead and make this a little bit thicker. Instead of a height of 5, let's do 10, which makes it a little bit taller above ground. But the other thing we can do is, right, when we fillet something, it actually is going to fillet the top edge and the bottom edge. And so what we may want to do is just adjust this so that that bottom edge is under the ground plane, right? So if we were putting this in a scene and there was, you know, a concrete pad or something around it, we could hide that without needing to use any other modeling tools. Now we could, so I'm just going to bring that down just a touch, right about to there. And you can kind of see that now that bottom fillet is below the surface, or below the ground plane. Right? Now, what I would usually do is I would actually go into polygon modeling. I would trim that off and make some changes, or I would use the bevel tool to just bevel one edge. But we're just going to do it with primitives, so we're making it a little quick. Nobody's going to know if it's hidden. All right, so we've got this set, and it's time to move to the top of the tower and do the top 3 objects that are on top of the tower. If we look at our reference again, we're not going to worry about any of this fancy stuff up top. We're just going to worry about this lattice structure here, this kind of cylinder here, and there's actually a short cylinder here. We're not going to worry about the windows, cone, cylinder, and then a pyramid. And so let's go ahead and start creating those. I'm going to work through these pretty quick because we've already done this and this tutorial is insanely long already. So let's go ahead and we'll make a cylinder. Obviously it's in the wrong place and it's too big, so I'm actually going to drag it up a little bit so it's a little easier to see. And then I'm going to go ahead and set the radius to maybe 10 for now, which seems about right. 15 might actually probably be better for this base one. And the height is just going to be 20. And it totally disappears at this point, and that's because it's inside the sphere. So I'm just going to hover over the green arrow here and pull this up until it's up, right? And it doesn't need to be fully exposed. The height right now is probably way too tall. I actually probably only need it to be this big. But no one's going to see inside the sphere. So it doesn't matter in terms of making the model we're making right now and our uses for it, which is just as a still static rendered image. It doesn't matter that this is deeper in there and that it's a separate object. We're just going to let it be. And then let's go ahead and increase our rotation segments to 36, even though this is a small object, just so that all of these polygons more or less align with one another. Okay, so I've created that one. So now it's time to create the cone, the little squat cone that sits on top of this. And to do that, I'm going to go up to my primitives. I'm going to go to cone. Again, right, my cone is way too far down, so I'm going to pull it up. I know its height is way too big, so I'm going to make the height, if I look back at my reference, maybe it's 10 or 15 in height, so let's just do 15, which is going to look really funny because of how wide it is right now. And right, it's floating above the top of that as well. So now I can pull this down a little bit. Now, this is something that you will notice is that it gets increasingly hard to know exactly where you're starting to intersect another object. And that is one of the things that if we go to these other views and say go to the front view and expand that to the full size and then hit the letter S, right? This allows us to have a better view of whether or not we're like intersecting like this or if we're just a hair above the other object than does the perspective view, right? And so now that I've got that set there, I'm going to pop back to my perspective view. I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to click on this little thing to full screen the perspective view. I'm going to hit H to go into this whole thing, rotate my view a bit, and then I know that bottom radius of 100 is far too big. So I'm going to go ahead and set that to 20 right now, which honestly looks pretty good. It might need to be a little bit bigger. If I go back and look at this, no, that's a decent amount of lip hanging over. And then I just need that top radius to be maybe 10 or something instead of 0. Maybe a little bit smaller. Maybe it needs to be either a little bit smaller, or it should be a little bit shorter. And I think maybe we just need to make it a little shorter. Let's go ahead and make the height 10 instead of 15. And then we can go back to our front view and hit S to zoom in. And so you'll see that when I rescale something, it basically evenly compresses it from the top and bottom, right? So it lifts it from the bottom and pushes it down from the top. So you just have to be aware of that when you're rescaling, that you will then need to potentially adjust the position again. All right, so there we go. All right, so that looks about right. And so then we know our top radius is 10, and we need just one more little cylinder to add on to the top of that. So in this case, I'm going to select my cylinder that's here. I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, or sorry, I'm going to hold down Control, excuse me. And when that little icon shows up, I'm going to click drag to create a copy of this. And then I'm just going to go ahead and change the radius to 10. And I'm going to change the height to 10 as well. And then I'm just going to lift it up until it seems like it looks like the original. So if I go back to Safari, that looks about accurate. And so I'm going to say I'm happy with that, right? Sure, it's actually about 5 tall. Right, so if we zoom out again, right, our tower is starting to take shape.